Before the video begins, this entire script and audio was recorded before Inside Out 2 released and therefore won't have any spoilers, but also it's definitely going to come out after Inside Out releases. Sorry, I guess. Howdy Lockslings! In the most recent and final trailer for Inside Out 2, Pixar revealed the new emotion of nostalgia, and I had mixed feelings when I found out about this. I began on a script about my opinions on this when I realised a lot of what I was saying applied to some or all of the other new emotions. So I scrapped that script and began a new one, not realising that the movie released in 3 days, and so here we are now. So let's go one by one through each new character. Anxiety was the first new emotion introduced and confirmed that there would be new emotions as a major element of this story. It makes sense that she was going to be introduced first, as it seems a large part of this film's plot will be about Riley and the emotions going through puberty, and anxiety is one of the most stereotypical aspects of that. There was some initial confusion and criticism around the similarities between anxiety and fear, but I'd argue that anxiety is unique enough. It has more build-up and dread over upcoming events, whereas fear is a much more primal and instantaneous reaction. I think that the movie will have to probably go out of its way to explain this, and that might drag on the pacing a bit, but honestly I don't really see an issue here. And it makes sense to introduce more complex emotions in the sequel, as it matches with Riley's development. On the topic of that, anxiety is an orange emotion, implying a combination of the sporadic and energetic nature of joy, which is yellow, and the primal negativity of anger, who's red. One aspect I wasn't so keen on in the trailer was anxiety's personality. It didn't seem very representative of her emotion. It seemed like that corporate quirky personality so prevalent in modern Disney movies. The emotions in these films have always been more complex than their names, but this feels like a step too far, and you can never really be too sceptical with the quality of a Disney sequel. Ennui is an odd case. First of all, literally nobody knows what it means, even less than anxiety. Pixar has to go out of its way to clarify to the audience in a not so subtle way, because they couldn't choose a name like boredom. Ennui means boredom, by the way. Obviously, boredom or ennui is quite literally the lack of emotion. We've already seen something similar when the emotions lose control of Riley in the first movie, and it is somewhat different, as instead in that she acts irrationally and not based on any emotion. However, that doesn't change how boredom is still very different to the rest of this cast, and honestly I have no idea how Pixar will manage to merge them into the plot, given how little of an emotion they actually are. It doesn't seem like it will tie in particularly well to the puberty theming either, as I don't really think boredom is commonly associated with that. Maybe I'm being an idiot, but I don't think that's very likely. I mean, come on. Oh, there were a few more things I was going to say. I like Ennui's more dulled and subtle purpley colours, and they do certainly act very much like boredom from what we have seen. Come to think of it, it may also be a bad thing, as it means we might not see much plot potential for the actual character either. Some additions just feel like they're there for the sake of it, to create a busy environment, and whilst I think there are benefits to having a busy environment, this just feels like a step too far. Next is envy. I've always been a bit confused with envy's existence, though unlike ennui and anxiety, I seem to be the only one. I'd always thought of envy as a negative emotion with a hint of resentment. You know, that probably says a lot about me. Either way, envy is represented as small with large eyes and typical cute cartoony proportions. More on that later. It's coloured similarly to disgust, which makes sense, as they're both focused very much on social interaction and perception. I think that her personality of a character runs the risk of getting a bit one-note, and not much development can be done with a character whose entire personality is following the actions of other characters, and having any arc that goes against that kind of defeats the purpose of the character. It would be hypocritical for this plot to have a plotline about the new emotions being villainous for suppressing the simpler emotions, whilst having envy just stop being a representation of envy and that being represented as a good thing. The entire point and focus of the movie, at least from what I've seen, is that emotions should be allowed to exist and be processed. How as a character herself, envy not have that much potential, but as an actual emotion I think she'll have quite a bit of relevance through the story, being crucial for many of Riley's actions, as it seems that she and anxiety will be the more active ones that cause Riley to do things more, whereas embarrassment and nostalgia and even ennui will likely be more passive. Envy does seem a slight bit of just an in-between of embarrassment and anxiety, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. She's unique enough. And another aspect is Envy's stereotypically cute design. Now, I didn't know what this movie meant by envy until 10 minutes ago when I began writing this segment of the script, so I might not be the most qualified person to talk off of this, but if you want my opinion, they wanted to convey a childlike sense of curiosity with a cuter design that could be moulded as the story progresses, as at the start from what we've seen her personality is rather one note. Speaking of one note, we have embarrassment, the biggest emotion giving way to physical comedy and representations of his clumsiness and awkwardness. He doesn't seem to speak much from what we've seen, and his pink colour matches blushing cheeks and is similar to Fear's purple, which makes sense given how similar the emotions are. None of the things I've said so far are bad things, some a bit unsubtle, but they all seem to work to help characterise the character. Now, as I said earlier, embarrassment won't really cause Riley to do much through the story. He can make in-the-moment and situational actions, but he's not as involved in causing any long-term decision-making. From what we've seen on the trailers, he serves some purpose in the story, placing the other emotions in the jar and literally being the biggest and strongest, almost mirroring how little he affects the outside world. And here's my movie prediction. On the trailers, they've already said that Embarrassment is a sweet guy, and he's the one to capture the emotions. So I suppose that he may be involved with their escape too. He could be bribed or swayed by the others. Granted, if that were to happen, I'm not sure it would be such a good thing, as it could easily fall into the trap of having the emotions be completely altered and replaced to be seen as a good thing. But either way, back to actual analysis. Embarrassment is seemingly a large blank slate that can be moulded by others. This supports my previous prediction, but just makes general sense as, like I said earlier, he's very socially orientated. Him and Envy both being a bit of a blank slate makes me think that maybe there'll be some metaphor about anxiety being the real villain and these ones are just henchmen, which I could see happening. Okay, before we talk about nostalgia, there is one criticism that I want to address, and that is the inconsistency with the first film, where in this one, Riley is shown to gain new emotions, but in the first film, every adult and other character we've seen has the same basic 5. This argument has been made to death by so many people, and I do not know who made it first, and I just don't really think it matters. When people point out issues like this to me, especially when they present them as plot holes, it's so frustrating because my definition of a plot hole is an event or pattern that's either by real-world physics or the fictional universe rules that make certain elements of the story impossible or highly improbable. This complaint is so minute, and I know that lots of complaints with the film are, but these people bring no other perspectives or arguments to the table. They introduce this one small issue and present it as a betrayal of the first film and proof that this film will be nothing but corporate pandering and a lack of creativity. Okay, now let's talk about nostalgia, the most recent and likely last emotion. I don't really like how she was introduced in trailer rather than as a twist in the movie, because this way the twist isn't a twist. But I don't really mind, as after enough time has passed and we're past the release date of the future, or I suppose we already are because this video is coming out late, then it won't really matter. Now, the introduction of nostalgia here and now doesn't make much sense in the context of the puberty plotline, but you could argue that it does make sense just in the context of Riley's new house and change in her circumstance. But that wouldn't really work either, as that was already conveyed very thoroughly in the first film. It was kind of like the entire point. Now that I think about it, one of the biggest reasons I'm so unsure about this movie is it removes a large aspect of simplicity and creativity from the first film's world building by giving it more simple and defined representations of these themes. And nostalgia is the worst offender of this, because nostalgia is literally the precise emotion created in the first film, a bittersweet combination of joy and sadness built from past events that have concluded. It's also a bit weird that nostalgia is notably older than all of the other emotions. Like, envy and embarrassment are shown to act a bit differently aged, but nostalgia is an elderly woman. Why is she representing a character who should be going through teenagehood? Actually, there are a few answers to that. None of them are fully satisfying though. Option 1 is she's representing an older emotion looking back on everything, which is why they are all literally younger. Another reason is that older people are stereotypically viewed as more nostalgic. And finally, it somewhat mirrors how most people's most nostalgic memories are of younger ages. Nostalgia has a pink-purple colour, like the 4th character already. But this time no reason that keeps it in line with the rest of the continuity of these colours. Instead it's pink and purple, likely because pink is associated with extreme positivity, and nostalgia shows that in her actions, literally wearing rose-tinted glitters. I will say it's good to see another positive emotion, as that felt rather lacking in the first film, but I think among so many emotions it's almost more awkward to have two positive emotions than just one, especially given how similar they are. In the first film you could draw some metaphor of joy being overpowered by the abundance of the other emotions and yet still staying in control. I can't really see nostalgia having any large effect in the story that wouldn't be achieved by the metaphor that they built in the original film, not only in the outside plotline, but also amongst the other emotions. I still can't see much potential. Her one biggest element of being so unique from all of the other newly introduced emotions is also her biggest detriment, as it limits the amount of interaction potential between these characters. And now that I think about it, it wouldn't really make much sense either, as a large element of the story is these new emotions taking action against the older ones who go against them, but with nostalgia being so dissimilar from them, it kind of seems odd that nostalgia isn't booted out with them. So, in conclusion, these new emotions do bring the potential for more thorough metaphors and portrayals of issues, but many of them come at the cost of the clarity and creativity that the original film came with heaps of. Oh well.